The United States has a very large debt. This debt is about $36 trillion. To give you an idea, this is a lot more money than many countries make in a whole year. This huge amount of money also grows very, very fast. Every second, the United States debt increases by about $75,000. Imagine buying a new car every second. That is how quickly the debt grows. This happens because many countries and people around the world trust the American economy. They are willing to lend money to the United States. They believe in its strength. It seems impossible to stop this debt from growing. Even if some countries do not like it, the global economy relies heavily on the US dollar. If this big financial system stopped, it could cause huge problems for the entire world. This makes us ask some important questions. How did the United States create this unique financial system? It seems strange that a country with so much debt can continue to add to it and still stay in control. Why do other countries keep lending money, even when it looks like the debt can never truly be paid back? We will look closely at how the United States built this powerful system. We will try to understand if the US dollar is truly the biggest financial pyramid in history. Some people think it is, while others do not. And a very important question is, what will happen if this big system finally breaks? What would happen to the world if the United States could not pay its debts? Understanding these things is important for everyone because the American economy touches all parts of the world. 2. Gold and the dollar. After World War II, the world faced massive challenges. Many cities in Europe and Asia were destroyed, and people were left without homes and money. It was a time for new beginnings and rebuilding, especially for the global economy. In July 1944, even as the war continued, important leaders and top economists from 44 countries came together. They met in Bretton Woods, a mountain resort in America. Their big task was to decide how the world's money system would work once the war was over. Key people there included the United States Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, and the famous British economist John Maynard Keynes. Before these wars, most countries tied their money to gold. But after the two world wars, many nations simply did not have enough gold to back the currency they had printed. During these conflicts, the United States became the world's main seller of goods, taking gold in return. Also, many European governments sent their gold to America for safety, far from the fighting. This meant that by the mid-1940s, the U.S. held about 3/4 of all the world's gold reserves. At the Bretton Woods Conference, the United States had a powerful position. They suggested a new system where the U.S. dollar would be the main currency for international trade. It was decided that other countries would link the value of their own money to the U.S. dollar. In turn, the U.S. dollar itself would be linked to gold at a fixed price. This made the dollar the undisputed center of the new global financial system. The conference also established the World Bank to help war-torn countries rebuild, and the International Monetary Fund to offer loans during money problems. This new structure, decided at Bretton Woods, clearly marked the start of America's strong financial leadership across the world. 3. A dollar with no gold. After the Second World War, many European countries were very poor. Cities were broken, and people had no homes or jobs. The United States worried that these countries might turn to communism. To help, U.S. Secretary of State George Marshall started a plan. This was called the Marshall Plan. The U.S. offered money to European nations to help them rebuild. This aid had two main goals. First, it would help stop the spread of communism. Second, it would create new markets for American goods. After the war, American factories made a lot of products, but Europe had no money to buy them. By giving money, the U.S. made sure that European countries could buy its goods. This was a smart investment for America. Thanks to this plan, the United States did not face an economic crisis. Instead, America entered a time known as its Golden Age. People had more money, and their lives got better. Many families could buy new cars and houses. But as Europe and Asia grew stronger, they started to make their own products. American companies also found it cheaper to make goods in other countries. This meant the U.S. began to buy more goods from abroad than it sold. This was a quiet warning sign for the American financial system. The world used dollars for trade, and the U.S. printed more of them. These dollars went to banks in other countries. But there was a problem. The dollar was still linked to gold. This link was made at the Bretton Woods meeting. As the U.S. spent more money around the world, especially for its global plans and fighting communism, more dollars were printed. Soon, there were more dollars in circulation than the U.S. had gold in its vaults. The market price of gold outside the U.S. became higher than the official price the U.S. offered. People could buy gold cheaply from the U.S. and sell it for more money elsewhere. France was one of the first countries to notice this problem. In 1965, the French president, Charles de Gaulle, asked the U.S. to exchange a large amount of its dollars for gold. The United States had no choice and sent 3,000 tons of gold to France. After this, other countries also started asking for their gold back. By 1970, U.S. gold reserves were half of what they were at the end of the war. It looked like the world might go back to every country using its own gold-backed money, which would hurt American financial power. Then, in August 1971, U.S. President Richard Nixon made a big change. He announced that the dollar would no longer be exchanged for gold. He said this was to stop people who were trying to make money by speculating. This decision ended the Bretton Woods Agreement. It was a bold move, but at that time, most of the world's money and trade already used the dollar. There was no good alternative currency. So, even without gold, the dollar remained the world's most important money. 4. The dollar and oil. After President Nixon ended the dollar's link to gold in 1971, America needed a new way to make its currency strong. The United States used much oil but had little itself, so it needed to buy oil from other nations to power its economy. The U.S. turned to the Middle East, a region rich in oil. Saudi Arabia became a key partner. In the 1930s, an American company found large oil fields there, leading to a special friendship. In 1945, President Franklin Roosevelt met the King of Saudi Arabia to discuss oil. American presidents continued these meetings for years. The U.S. bought oil and in return provided military help and technology to Saudi Arabia. By the 1970s, Saudi Arabia was a major oil exporter. To make this trade easier, the U.S. made a crucial deal. In 1974, Washington agreed with major oil countries to sell oil only for U.S. dollars. This meant any country needing oil had to get U.S. dollars first. This gave the dollar a powerful new role in global trade.
Even without gold, nations needed dollars for oil, the world's vital resource. But what would oil countries do with their many U.S. dollars? The United States had another clever plan. In July 1974, U.S. Treasury Secretary William Simon visited Saudi Arabia. He convinced the king to invest extra oil money, called petrodollars, back into the U.S. economy. Saudi Arabia would buy U.S. government bonds, lending its dollars back to the United States. This created a strong, continuous cycle. The U.S. bought oil with dollars. Saudi Arabia then invested a large part of these dollars back into the U.S. Soon, other oil exporters did the same. This system gave the world a very strong reason to keep using the dollar. It made the U.S. dollar the main currency for oil trade for decades, creating a new, powerful reason for the world to use the dollar. 5. America the big buyer. The United States once sold many goods to the world. During World War II, it produced almost half of all industrial goods. But after 1975, this changed. The U.S. started buying more from other countries than it sold. It became the world's biggest buyer, changing its role in the global economy. This shift happened because the dollar became strong and other countries began to make more products. It was expensive for American companies to make goods at home, especially with higher labor costs in the U.S. So, many American companies moved their factories to other countries, like China and Vietnam, where workers were paid less. For example, a big shoe company like Nike has many factories in Asia, but most of its customers are in America. The goods are made cheaply abroad and then brought back to the U.S. This meant the U.S. did not need to produce as much itself. This strong dollar also created problems for American factories and their workers. To try and fix this, in 1985, 5 major countries met. These were the U.S., Great Britain, France, West Germany, and Japan. They signed an agreement called the Plaza Accord. The main goal was to make the U.S. dollar weaker. Central banks began selling dollars, which helped lower the American currency's value. This made American goods cheaper for other countries to buy. But it also made other countries' money stronger. This change hurt Japan's economy badly, leading to a severe recession. At the same time, President Ronald Reagan was in office. He wanted to make America stronger. He lowered taxes for companies.
His idea was that lower taxes would help businesses grow, create more jobs, and make people richer. However, the government still needed money for important things, like military spending during the Cold War. With lower taxes, the government had less income, so it had to borrow much more money. This caused the national debt to grow much faster. In the 1980s, the U.S. national debt grew from almost $1 trillion to $2.9 trillion. President Reagan, who once spoke against big debts, helped create a significant financial problem for the future of the U.S. economy. 6. How the big debt works. The government of the United States makes plans each year. It decides how much money it needs for things like roads, schools, and pensions. But for many years, the government has spent more money than it takes in. This is called a budget deficit. To get the extra money it needs, the government borrows. It does this by selling special papers called bonds. When you buy a U.S. government bond, you are lending money to the government. The government uses this money for its many programs. Then, after some years, the government pays you back your money plus a little extra, called interest. The U.S. Treasury, like a country's finance department, is the one that issues these bonds. Over time, the money the U.S. government spends just to pay the interest on its debt has grown very large. In 2023, it paid over $1 trillion in interest. This is a huge sum. Because it needs so much money, the government often issues new bonds to pay for its old debts and other costs. This system is like a financial pyramid. In a pyramid, new investors' money pays off earlier investors. The U.S. system keeps going because new people and countries always want to buy U.S. bonds. The dollar has a special role here. Other countries with so much debt would see their money become worthless. But the dollar is different because it is used for a lot of world trade and by central banks everywhere. This means the world still needs dollars, even with such a big debt. The U.S. also has a debt ceiling. This is a rule that limits how much money the government can borrow. When the government reaches this limit, it cannot borrow more. This can be a big problem. If it cannot borrow, it might not be able to pay its bills or the interest on its old debts. This would be a default, which means not paying back money owed. This debt ceiling often causes big political fights in Congress, which is where U.S. laws are made. For example, in 2011, President Barack Obama was a Democrat, but the House of Representatives had many Republicans. The Republicans did not want to raise the debt ceiling. They wanted Obama to agree to spend less government money. They almost did not agree, which could have caused a huge financial crisis. They found a solution just before the U.S. would have stopped paying its debts. This event made some people lose trust in the U.S. economy.
Similar fights happened in 2013 and again during President Joe Biden's time in 2021 and 2023. In 2023, President Biden decided to stop the debt ceiling rule until January 1, 2025, to avoid another fight. These events show that the debt ceiling has become a political tool. These arguments in Congress can make the whole financial system feel unsafe, even though the U.S. owes a lot of its debt to itself. 7. Who has the money? It is interesting to see who actually owns America's large debt. Many people might think that other countries own most of it, but this is not completely true. A big part of the U.S. debt is internal. This means the United States owes money to itself. About 1/5 of this debt is held by different parts of the U.S. government. This includes federal agencies and special pension funds for American workers. Another part, about 13%, belongs to the U.S. Central Bank, called the Federal Reserve. So roughly 35% of all U.S. debt is owed by the government to its own parts. It is clear that the government cannot go bankrupt from money it owes to itself. A large portion of the remaining debt, more than 40%, is owned by Americans. This includes individual people as well as American banks, investment groups, insurance companies, and other businesses. Only about 25% of the total U.S. debt is held by foreign countries. The main foreign lenders are Japan, China, and the United Kingdom. However, today, China, India, and other growing nations are increasingly asking the question, why are we using the U.S. dollar so much? They think about using their own currencies for trade instead. For example, China's president met with Saudi Arabia's crown prince. He offered to pay for oil in Chinese yuan, not U.S. dollars. Saudi Arabia's finance minister also said that using other currencies for trade is fine.
Countries like Russia, China, the United Arab Emirates, and India have also made deals to trade oil using their own money. The BRICS group, which includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is even discussing creating a new currency for their trade. The United States has a strong response to these actions. Donald Trump, for example, has said the U.S. would put very high tariffs, on goods from countries that try to move away from the dollar. These tariffs would make it hard for those countries to sell their products in the U.S. The U.S. is a very important market for many countries like India and China. So these countries need good relations with the U.S. for their own economies to be strong. Because of this, the U.S. dollar still holds a very strong place in global trade, even with these new efforts to use other currencies. 8. A problem for everyone. A U.S. default would be a truly terrible event. It would cause the largest economic crisis in all of human history. Imagine this. Trillions of dollars, which many countries have lent to the United States, would suddenly become worthless. This would start a huge global panic where people sell investments quickly. Many businesses would fail, and hundreds of millions of investors would lose everything. People would try to get rid of their money, buying gold and real estate instead. In the United States, the suffering would be far worse than the Great Depression. Since America is the world's most important economy, its fall would drag down almost every other country. Nations like Japan, China, India, and all of Western Europe would face deep problems. Countries in the Middle East would also suffer. All these nations would lose trillions of dollars in savings. The global financial system would crash completely, like a house of cards falling down. Everyone who uses the dollar or trusts in its power would be affected. But why would even America's rivals want to prevent such a collapse? The reason is clear. No country wants a debtor to go bankrupt, especially when that debtor owes so much money. If the U.S. cannot pay its debts, then everyone who holds those debts loses their investments. The chance of this happening is very small because leaders around the world understand the terrible consequences. Because of this, the U.S. national debt is no longer just an economic issue. It has become a matter of global politics. The balance of the entire world economy relies on it. So it is not just the United States that tries to avoid a default.
CIS. All countries holding U.S. dollar debts work to prevent it. These debts make up more than half of all government debts on the planet. This means the system is seen as too big to fail. Many powerful countries have too much to lose if the dollar system breaks down. They will always take action to keep it strong and stable. Do you think a new currency from a country like China or the BRICS group could one day replace the US dollar?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.